the Vanguard with DJ Trump and George. Me being George, my guest being DJ Trump.
DJ Trump, everyone's favorite KZSU host, living rent-free in your heads, and as the comic relief on the beloved Vanguard.
Yep, it's 6 a.m. On this beautiful Wednesday. This fair Wednesday. But this Wednesday has had one particular problem that has existed for the past couple weeks. I think we're going to talk about a certain virus, a certain Wuhanic plague.
No, not the Wuhanic plague. You can't call it that.
Well, we'll see about that.
I prefer the Coronapocalypse personally, but still, the Wuhanic plague.
Yeah.
The Kung flu. I've also heard. It's fun.
Yes.
But yes. So everybody, stay tuned. Stay inside. Don't go anywhere, both figuratively and literally. You're not allowed to if you're listening to this in the Bay Area.
Yeah, I was going to say, so for reference, if anyone hasn't gotten the memo, since yesterday at 12:01 a.m., there has been a shelter-in-place order across 6 Bay Area counties, including our own Santa Clara County, and then also San Francisco County, Marin County, San Mateo County, I believe Alameda County, and one more county. Do you remember the other county?
I will pull it up. I do not have it in front of me at the moment, unfortunately.
Yeah, okay. But yes, in any case, you don't go out unless you need to.
I got out in the nick of time.
It's also Contra Costa County is the 6th county. So Alameda, Contra Costa, Marin, San Francisco, San Mateo, and Santa Clara. So just so you know how this is to be enforced, because I did a bit of research. Obviously, if you have necessities, if you have health necessities, food, things like that, you can definitely go out for that. Just be careful, obviously. Follow the principle of social distancing. Also, you are allowed to go out, personally, to go exercise, but only do so with close relatives. And, you can take your dog for a walk or whatever. But really, again, also try to keep your distance. And then also,
if you're going to try and win the Darwin Awards, make sure you're only bringing other members of your gene pool with you.
Yeah, exactly. Other thing is that the police have sort of released guidance, at least the sheriff of San Francisco released guidance saying, they really don't want to have to get people in trouble. So as long as you're behaving in a way that's reasonable, and I don't think the law enforcement officers should give you any trouble, just understand that technically you are supposed to be careful regarding...
I can't imagine anybody in San Francisco actually being engaged with by the police. I mean, this is the property crime capital of the country. I mean, rampant problems of homelessness. If people can defecate in the streets, I don't think that anybody walking around minding their own business is going to generate much attention. And if it did, it would be incredibly ironic.
Yeah, that would be rather unfortunate. And yeah, ironic and funny in a sad way. Regardless, it would be I just kind of wanted to make sure that we all are on the same page about how important this is.
Indeed. Some of the projections I've seen could indicate that as many as 1.7 million Americans could potentially be killed. The highest I've seen thrown around is 2.2 million. And obviously this is a major problem. It could kill as much as 1% of the population if the stats are to be believed. And I mean, there's some reason to debate some of the validity because a lot of the case numbers we don't actually have accurate data on, which is a problem because many of the more mild cases are very similar to the cold or flu. As a matter of fact, relatives of the coronavirus are one of the major culprits for the common cold. But
yeah,
I mean, in any case, if the disease is anywhere near as bad as some experts are projecting that it might be, it's absolutely serious for a very large segment of the population, and we don't want to take it for granted. On the other hand, I think you and I both agree that some of the reaction has been problematic, to say the very least.
Oh, some of the reactions in some ways worse than the actual disease. So we need to recognize exactly, just get some facts about the coronavirus. First of all, the coronavirus is really its main, I think the main thing that makes it so problematic is just that it spreads so quickly. So for reference, there are metrics for this. For the coronavirus, the R0 value, or the basic reproduction value, that means how many people does the average infected person infect, supposedly. So the R0 value for influenza is considered to be 2 to 3. For the coronavirus, it's anywhere between 1.4 to 3.9, but it is thought to be a little bit higher than the flu. and it's by airborne droplet, just like the flu. So I mean, the issue is just that it spreads fairly easily. Additionally, it's good to know that the elderly people who generally are more susceptible to these kinds of illnesses in general are especially disproportionately susceptible to the coronavirus. So that's I guess just good to keep in mind as a an important health note. So that's the big, I guess, those are the big problems it causes. The other thing is that uh, China did not really do its due diligence preventing this, so that's why it started spreading so quickly, is because they basically tried everything they could to keep it under wraps in the public eye, so no one had really time to respond to it. But yeah, that's the big problem with coronavirus. However, like again, even though it's a little more deadly than the flu, it's not that deadly. I mean, it's really very difficult for someone credibly to argue that this is really that terrible for any particular person. It's just that it spreads very quickly. So we need to understand what the real problems are behind it before we discuss it.
Well, I mean, for reference, the coronavirus is being projected, depending on who you're talking to be as high as 3.4% with mortality rate, but I mean, often much closer to 1%. And given the fact that we have a lot of cases that are probably flying under the radar because they're so mild, it could actually be substantially lower than that. But even if it's only 0.5% fatality rate, it's still going to be substantially more than the flu, which I think is less than a 100. I'm going to pull that up right now, but millions of people get the flu every year, and only about 12,000 to 60,000 people per year die of it. So I mean, the flu is far from trivial. It's killed more people than the coronavirus. I mean, at present, that number could change. I'm looking at the CDC website right now, and as of this recording, the current figures are at about 4,200 cases in the United States. I heard tonight that all 50 states in the union have been confirmed to have at least one case. West Virginia was the last one to get it. And about 75 people have died at present. So hopefully those numbers don't rise too dramatically, but many people are concerned about an exponential spread because, as my good friend George pointed out, there is a very high rate of transmission.
Yeah. So it is, I guess, good to note though that that basically the coronavirus doesn't obviously reaches places that are most or have the most travel in and out first. So the coronavirus obviously was going to reach somewhere like West Virginia last. I can say there are other internal other internal states that have really not reached very much, but states like California, Washington, New York, etc. have been really hit hard. So that's part of why the Bay Area particularly is hit hard, just because San Francisco International Airport is one of the biggest airports in terms of international flights, particularly from China. And China, South Korea, and Iran are all in Asia, with the latter, the first two countries of those three being two of the two places that have a lot of flights into the U.S. and are also big sources of coronavirus.
All right, Italy in particular is getting hard hit. I'm looking at a global map from the BC right now, and as of the time of this recording, which would have been St. Patrick's Day the night before, lovely folks in the Bay Area, so this might have gone up. Over 30,000 people, 31,506 people have gotten infected in Italy, and over 2,500 of them have died. So at present, according to the best figures I have available, the coronavirus has already claimed 7,000 people, which makes it about 10 times worse than the SARS outbreak from a similar disease that occurred in about 2003, which killed a little bit more than 700 people. But it was over a much longer time span, so already coronavirus is an order of magnitude worse than that outbreak. So we hope that the measures taken to have contained it will contain it, but at the same time, it's not looking great.
Yeah. Yeah, that's definitely. I think there's going to be some difficulty for sure containing this. I will say I think some of this is an overreaction, though. There's really no reason that, for example, people in small to mid-sized cities in the middle of the country where it really has barely, if at all, penetrated, need to be staying home from work and such. I mean, basically, it's just shutting down the economy for perhaps not very good reason.
Right, and there are two things that I'm concerned about long-term with that. I'd like to broach the first one, which is relatively obvious, which I mentioned on the program before. My fear is that this is going to seriously affect the 2020 election, because President Trump's main pitch as an incumbent president was, look at how great of a steward I've been of the economy. Look at how great things are going. The United States has, over the course of most of his tenure, had a very strong economy, not quite breaching 3% every year, but getting quite close to it. Record low levels of unemployment, record high stock markets. And now we see in the stock market giving everybody heart palpitations. It's like a roller coaster constantly going up and down, although trending downwards. And people are starting to get laid off. I know. I mean, I'm back home. A lot of my friends and family are either working from home or not working at all at present, despite the fact that we only have a handful of cases in our community right now. But people are really afraid, and it's having a pretty serious impact on particularly quote unquote non-essential businesses that tend to cater more towards entertainment or pleasure. So travel is down very seriously. You can get air flight tickets super cheap, actually. I think I managed to get a flight for like $50 on the way home because nobody else wants to fly. The airlines are hemorrhaging money.
Yeah.
That's the Essential Economic Report.
Yeah. So basically, that is kind of it's a legitimate problem. I think the other thing is just that some people have wondered whether perhaps China is going to challenge U.S. dominance even more gravely. Some would even argue that this was perhaps intentional, a release. I would doubt that. However, some still think that, okay, this is going to weaken the U.S., we need to be ready for some sort of conflict. If we really believe that, though, then why are we shooting our economy in the foot right before perhaps such a conflict? That's, I guess, one of my concerns.
I understand that, but I don't think that there's going to be a military conflict with China in the next year or so. I can see them being a long-term geopolitical adversary, but I think they're probably reeling from the coronavirus even more than we are. They had over 80,000 cases. Supposedly, the spread is slowing because of their authoritarian measures. But at the same time, some whistleblowers on the ground have said the situation is even worse than they're letting on. So I suspect that, China is a paper tiger in many ways, in my opinion. I do think that it could pose a serious threat, but it has so many internal weaknesses, and this is just a case study in that, in many ways.
Certain.
So, one thing I've heard thrown around, a lot of people think that this was originated out of a food market. That's a possibility. The way that they treat the animals there isn't very sanitary, to say the least, and there's certainly plenty of potential for viruses and infections to jump species. Other people have speculated that it could be a bioweapon because Wuhan happens to have a pretty major bioengineering laboratory and facility. So it's possible that it could have leaked. But at present, I don't know if there's any hard data, or at least not any hard data to the public that indicates either of those hypotheses. I think the food market was being put out very early on, but at the same time now there's some data challenging that. So who knows? I think maybe in a year's time we can figure it out. Maybe we won't. Maybe the public will never know, because my personal hypothesis, the one I think the most likely, is that they might have been messing around with the coronavirus and then it got out accidentally, because I don't think that communists are particularly capable at anything, let alone handling seriously sensitive materials that could potentially kill people. So
how would it? I guess so. You're thinking maybe some scientists working on it perhaps inadvertently got exposed and then went home and such, and then that started it.
Yes, some people have gone so far as to say that they think this was intentional. I don't think so, because you're shooting yourself in the foot pretty badly. The Chinese economy was the first to get hit. They shut down half their entire country essentially for weeks.
Yeah, that's true.
So
I definitely think that it would be a very odd strategic choice to do so intentionally, but perhaps they did. I don't know.
Right, and this is just me speculating, but I do bring it up partially because the Chinese government is now insinuating, or at least officials are insinuating, that the United States is somehow responsible.
Of course they're blaming us because they're our enemies. They want to make their enemies as weak as possible. Of course, it just makes sense.
Perhaps, but
it doesn't make logical sense to claim that we are. Yeah.
I know. I just wish that people would take logic a little bit more seriously. Maybe that's me asking too much of our political adversaries. But even Joe Biden domestically, although we may be differentiating it from Chinese interest isn't always as easy as it appears to be. In any case, he was also trying to go after President Trump for calling coronavirus a hoax. And President Trump a couple of weeks ago was certainly being more measured in his response. He did shut down the border to China, which apparently, not a border with China, obviously, but closing the United States border to entry of various Chinese nationals.
Yes.
And he got a lot of criticism for that, for being xenophobic, despite that being quarantine 101. I don't know why. And he probably substantially slowed the spread of the United States' coronavirus problem that way. So
Yeah, I was
kudos
gonna
to him
say
for that.
people have been saying he's not doing enough, but like let's be honest, if any Democrat or quite frankly a lot of other Republicans had been in office, they wouldn't have implemented travel restrictions and thus, you know, that would have wiped out any benefit of all the money they possibly could have spent on it.
Although that's not going to stop them from trying, and we'll get to their idiotic bills
It's
much
not going
later.
to stop them at all. No, absolutely not. I mean, there's more of somebody else's money to spend. They're there every time.
Never let a crisis go to waste, brother. But aside from the fact that the Democrats are playing their usual song and dance and Republicans are going along with the Pied Piper for some reason, we will get to that certainly later. I mean, it does seem strange for the party of open borders and the party of social welfare to start complaining about letting people in. I'm not letting that now. I mean, Canada, for example, Justin Trudeau, being a far leftist ideologue, has now officially closed all of its borders, so we can now point and laugh at Canada for being bigots. I guess. I don't know. Then on top of that, Tim Pool, if anybody follows him, he's a sort of center-left journalist who's slowly but surely seeing the dementia on the political left. I think today was a big moment for him because he came out and said that you're telling me that I have to self-quarantine because I believe he lives in one of the affected areas and can't leave my house for months potentially because we don't have enough hospital beds. Yet you're also telling me we're going to provide medical care to anybody who comes here ever.
Yeah.
So it's hilarious to see the Democrats try and go on the offensive when so many of their policies have contributed to making this worse and could make this much worse in the future if it were to happen under their tenure. I have zero confidence in Joe Biden's ability to manage anything. So,
Yeah, Joe Biden's gone mentally. I mean, he kind of checked out probably in 2018 or so. It's been a couple years.
yeah.
Yeah, poor guy.
Slow Joe, bad touch Biden, sleepy Joe Biden,
Slow
creepy Joe
Joe's.
Biden.
I mean, honestly, Slow Joe's the most accurate.
I like bad touch Biden because I think that is going to point out some of his more uncomfortable moments. And also, aside from just literally bad touching people, he doesn't have much rhetorical touch or any kind of finesse whatsoever. So it has a double entendre there. I like that.
That is true. He's kind of out of touch mentally.
Yeah, we're just going to keep punching it and punching it.
Yeah. We're gonna fight domestic violence. We're gonna keep punching and punching.
Corn Pop was a bad dude.
Yep.
I'm sorry. There's just so many dumb Joe Biden moments. And people try to go after Trump. Trump, at least, whatever you believe of his ideology, he can be coherent in speech for prolonged periods of time. That's not something Joe Biden can be capable of. If we actually get to that stage, the debate, I think, is going to be amazing.
Yeah, Joe Biden is. It's just kind of sad, you know? Like, I kind of feel bad watching the guy almost.
I don't. I mean, the amount of damage he's going to do to the country, or at least his aides, his quote-unquote aides, who are certainly just helping him and not pulling the strings on this decaying puppet by any means, are going to do enough damage to the country that I feel like we need to do whatever we can within the bounds of the law.
Oh, no, I'm not saying we don't hit him as hard as we can with negative attack ads and stuff. I'm just saying I feel bad for his dementia. Not at all for, like, basically punishing him for the bad things he's done.
I mean, I feel bad for certain individuals. I don't think I particularly feel bad for Joe Biden. I just feel like Joe Biden needs to go home.
He needs to go to a home.
No, I mean, maybe not right now. Now is not the best time to check into one of those.
Well, I don't know. Maybe, you know, since he loves China so much, he can get their virus.
Okay. And in any case, this actually brings up a serious point. Bernie Sanders is still in the race, although it's not actually really credibly having a chance of winning unless Joe Biden drops out or dies. And
yeah, or like if he literally like somehow were tied to the coronavirus, maybe.
That was
yeah. So tonight there are 3 primaries. It appears that with most of the vote in, 91% of the vote in Florida, Biden has 61.5%, Sanders has 22.8%, Gabbard has 0.5%. I don't know where all the other percentages go.
Mike Bloomberg.
Maybe, yeah, I don't know. In Illinois, in Florida's the delegate president of the night. It has 219 Democratic delegates. In Illinois, which has 155 Democratic delegates, 56.5% for Biden, 38.2% for Sanders, 0.5% for Gabbard. And then in Arizona, which is 67 delegates, no results in yet.
All right. So going back to the previous point, I do think there's a reasonable chance that one of the major candidates could at least get infected with coronavirus, and they're all in the danger zone because supposedly half the country is going to get it, And politicians in particular live in an environment and work in an environment where they have to interact with a lot of people. So they can try and minimize that as much as they want. But, I mean, if one or two of the candidates gets the virus and potentially there's like a 15% shot one of them dies, this could be a major black swan event. And I say this pointing out that all three candidates are vulnerable. Bernie Sanders had a heart attack. He has some underlying health conditions. He's 78 years old. Joe Biden seems to be developing Alzheimer's disease. I'm not qualified to officially diagnose him, but there's something
Well, a lot
going
of
on with
doctors I know have tried.
Right. And I mean, you're not supposed to diagnose someone in public
Haven't-
life.
You
Once it
haven't.
goes-
Well, you're not supposed to diagnose someone you haven't seen as a patient. But yeah.
Right. I mean, it goes against basic ethics. Not that that's ever stopped liberals from trying.
Well, it's not just basic ethics. It's also just like, and it's not very like reliable either. Like you don't know unless you've actually seen the patient.
Right. But in any case, Joe Biden has some underlying medical conditions. He's 77 years old. Donald Trump he's overweight. He doesn't sleep very much. And he's 73 years old. I mean, I love the guy to death.
Well,
but
other thing is like even so, should we mention our friend Bill in the Republican primary? Not that relevant, but
Bill Weld, he's still in the race?
Somehow, no real reason he should be there, but he is.
Yeah.
But yeah, in any case,
a lot of politicians
to the extent that it's relevant, he's 74, so he's an old man too. Everybody's old.
Yeah, we are living in the era of the septuagenarians. They shall inherit the earth.
Yep.
So,
in any case, So speaking of the Republican primary, I believe tonight because of the Florida primary, I think this pushed Trump over the top. Because of the Florida primary, where he got all 122 delegates, and the Illinois primary, we got all 60. He has 66 out of the 67. One, I guess, hasn't been assigned yet. And Arizona just didn't have one this year, I think, for president, because I think a lot of them just kind of gave up since Trump was an incumbent. But because of that, now he's at 1,301 delegates, which is over the 1,276 needed to have a majority. So at this point, he is officially the presumptive nominee. And Bill Weld has all of one delegate.
Well, he points to trying. You get one. You may have one. And 2.18% of the votes. Donald Trump, within the popular vote. Oh, this is interesting. You might find this fascinating. These are primaries where everyone knows the results are already done, and it doesn't really matter. You had more than 10 million, probably close to 11 million, according to the Wikipedia page, have already voted in favor of Donald Trump, and Donald Trump has about 94% support within the primary voters. So he has very, very high support within the Republican Party, and there seems to be a reasonable amount of enthusiasm. I'm going to see how many people voted in the Democratic primary for comparison. But it seems to be about 11 million voters in the Republican primaries this far, despite the fact that they're utterly uncompetitive. And
to be fair, I will say that on some dates, there are other offices with primaries, but not in Florida today, at least. I know Florida is not, like, its other offices are later in August, I think, right?
Right, Native Floridian can confirm, and those are the primaries. We did it. At the local level, we had a couple of minor referendums on term limits or for like commissioners. It was interesting, but there wasn't anything. There weren't any other offices up, or even primaries for offices. It was just local referenda on procedure.
Yep. So not a ton. Yeah, that definitely makes sense. So yeah, so far Trump has gotten almost 9.7 million votes in his primary. So yeah, that's good.
Right.
Yeah.
So it seems like the Democrats. I'm still trying to find the number how many people voted, but it seems to be close to 20 million, probably twice as many people voted in that primary, which makes sense considering people actually have a meaningful vote and a meaningful choice in that one. But still, I mean, having that high of a level of enthusiasm from the Republican Party doesn't bode very well for the Democrats. Although maybe coronavirus might. I don't.
Yeah, coronavirus definitely bodes well for the Democrats.
Anything that causes death and destruction and mayhem is good for Democrats.
Yeah, which is kind of sad, but it is the case. So, just since I felt tempted to look at it, a lot of counties aren't in Illinois particularly yet for the Republican primary, but I was looking, so only 9% of the votes are in. I was gonna see how the vote is in, say, like DuPage County, which is part of suburban Chicago area, and then which only has 4% of the vote in, and then Cook County, which is Chicago itself. So yeah, the idea is to try to figure out how Trump is doing in a couple of those states, in a couple of those counties, and then in Florida, I was kind of curious how he was doing in Miami-Dade County, just because that's not particularly favorable territory, but I'm curious to see whether there are noticeable differences in how many people voted for, say, Weld, who's the only real challenger.
I also would like to note that Florida is now technically Trump's home state because he's left New York, so home state put him over the top.
That is kind of interesting.
Right.
Isn't it?
I'd also like to note that there are some interesting political developments. And by interesting, I mean it in the worst sense of the word, like the old Chinese proverb, may you be cursed that live in interesting times. According to a story from the Seattle Times, which may be connected to the Washington Post, the United States government is in active talks with Facebook, Google, and other tech companies to see if they can use some of the data they've gleaned from our phones to combat the coronavirus by tracking whether or not we're actually keeping a safe distance from one another. So
that's not good.
Indeed. I mean, they're saying it's going to be anonymous and it's going to be big data without any names tied to it.
I have a fun story about anonymous and data. So not exactly related, but interestingly, Bill Weld, one of these Republican candidates, this pissy, not very important Republican challenger for president, he had a bit of a data snafu when he was governor of Massachusetts. So yeah, it's quite interesting actually to take a look at. Basically, he was trying to figure out when this happened exactly, but he basically had a medical data. He was trying to collect medical data, I believe, but the idea was it was supposed to be anonymized, and so he wanted to in 1997. He basically had a program that was supposed to comply with HIPAA, and it was supposed to be a great way to use the insurance data an insurance data set with medical data that had been stripped of direct identifiers. And the intent was that they would use it for certain research. However, I forgot her name, but this basically data-focused researcher figured out who he was, because it could go down by precinct and such. So figured out by name, or no, not by name, but because she knew where she used the voter registration, I think, for Bill Weld, because that's public information, and she figured out through his age, residency, and such, and a couple other things, exactly which data was his, and she sent him his file in the mail, and it was kind of famous back at the time in 1997. But
oh, that's back when I was born, dude.
I'm just saying that even people in the race right now have experience with this, interestingly enough.
Right. So going back to the damage, potentially, as you pointed out, people could manipulate the data in order to find individual cases if they wanted to. But I have a lot of skepticism that they're going to actually not look at this on an individual basis, because government has lied to us about surveillance pretty consistently, like whether or not they made mistakes in the FISA court, or whether or not the NSA was spying on citizens' metadata at all. I mean, remember when John Brennan lied to Congress and then was totally not prosecuted? It was... I mean, I have almost no confidence whatsoever in the integrity of the espionage agencies not to get a hold of data they're not supposed to. And given that this would be really useful to enforcement, if we start going into more draconian measures, I can see the United States government potentially tracking people's movements and then penalizing them if they break quarantine. And I don't see that going away after the virus ends, because the crisis may end, but the powers you grant the government during it don't go away, as we've learned all too many times.
Oh, absolutely, and I think that's definitely something we need to be concerned about. We think the thing we always need to remember is that these powers that we give the government, they will fight tooth and nail to keep them. So we need to be very careful about what it is that we give them, and make sure that whatever it is what they actually have a legitimate reason to have.
Right. So obviously there have been a lot of extreme measures going on across the country. So in some communities more so than others. Within the Bay Area and those aforementioned counties, you have the shelter-in-place order, which is not currently being enforced by the police very militantly, but who knows? And in New York City, they've shut down all public gatherings of more than 500 people. The CDC has put out recent data indicating not only social distancing, but recommending that you don't have any interactions with more than 10 people. And I don't know, it seems like we are taking the quarantine very seriously. Hopefully that does flatten the curve, but I remain a little bit skeptical, and I worry about potential enforcement mechanisms.
Oh, absolutely. There are definitely things to be worried about. But
Also, Andrew Yang is apparently making a comeback because a lot of people in Congress, including our least favorite Senator Mittens, are now pushing for cash for all, $1,000 sent to every American, no questions asked.
yeah, I was gonna say, I mean, I thought we were supposed to be the party that didn't support welfare, and certainly didn't support like outright socialism. But apparently they didn't get the memo.
And whenever you're in a crisis, you just got to give away money. That's how you calm people down. I mean, you're gonna shut. I guess what they don't seem to understand is a lot of people are saying, "Oh, we need to give people cash in order to prevent a recession because you'll get more liquidity." But you're already shutting down a huge section of the economy. Like giving people money won't reopen the restaurant sector, won't reopen travel.
It's kind of interesting because you think about how World War II worked. You know, the Depression was sort of wrapping up around the time of World War II. It was slowly ending. Really did not end until basically the liberalization of the economy after World War II. But people started having more cash in their pockets, at least, because more money was being printed essentially by the government. But they couldn't spend that, so it wasn't very useful.
Right. I mean, the government can't create wealth. They can't just print it out of thin air. I mean, you can expand the money supply, but if there's not more for that money to buy, it's not going to mean anything.
Oh,
and
no,
also,
you're essentially just reducing the value of each dollar you have.
Yeah, hyperinflation. Weimar Germany and Zimbabwe would like to have a word with you. So that's a little bit distressing, I mean, to say the least. But I don't know. One thing I will say for a bit of comic relief is I've been practicing social distancing for 22 years, so I think I'm going to be okay. And a lot of other introverts have similar stories.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think that social distancing has been kind of a joke at this point. You know, it's just that, yeah, obviously don't stay away or don't get too close to people who, especially people who you think might be ill. It just seems like kind of a silly thing to be, you know, to make such a big deal out of. It's not that impressive.
Right. One thing that gets on my nerves a little bit is I have a tendency to get allergies this time of year. So I'm fine for almost all day, but every once in a while my nose itches, then I panic and think maybe I have coronavirus, or if I don't, maybe other people will think I have coronavirus, in which case I'm still going to be even more isolated than I am now, and I might need to quarantine. So I wonder how many other people are going through similar situations of false positives. I mean, I hope it's false positive. I don't know. I'm on the phone, so George is not in any danger for you, our beloved listeners.
Yeah, nobody's in. We're definitely practicing our social distancing.
What is our social distance right now? About 1,500 miles at least.
Yeah, I don't know how far. Far enough for sure.
I will run the numbers. Give me a moment.
Yep, there we go.
Evan, can we get a fact check?
Yep, fact check. Ha ha ha. In any case, I'm kind of curious to see how do you think this is going to affect people socially? You know, in terms of how they're going to react to having to be at home so much, having to interact with fewer of their friends, etc.
I don't know. I mean, to be honest, right now I'm enjoying it myself because I'm spending more time with family, which I don't usually get to do with being in school and all. But I mean, trying to interact with some of my friends who have come back in town has been a bit of a hassle. I think it's going to be irritating. Now, I wonder about some of the mental health effects. I mean, if we're going to go on a tangent for a little while, because people are social animals. We do need a certain amount of social interaction in order to stay mentally all there. And I wonder if people might get a little bit stir crazy if this goes on for too long. Also, fact check, 784 miles.
Okay.
So not as good as I thought we were, but we're still pretty safe.
Yeah, I think we'll probably be just fine.
Okay. I mean, who knows? The coronavirus could go over. It could jump into the digital era and then go over the cell phone call.
Yeah.
There was a joke. There was a joke there. I didn't make it.
Yeah, I was gonna say we're not gonna have the digital coronavirus, but yeah. In any case, I think another thing we need to discuss is what do you think the impact is going to be on China's public image and also on how people treat China?
Well, as of now, it's not great. I mean, it seems that some people are reporting potential xenophobic acts against Chinese Americans. I haven't seen a lot of that, to be honest. I know the concern exists, but
Seems a bit like a canard to me, honestly.
right. But I do think that a lot of people are going to be angry at China, especially when you really look at how they handled the early situation by suppressing information, not letting it get to the outside world.
Well, and also punishing whistleblowers.
Yeah, that's never a good thing. And what's even worse, I mean, a lot of people in the United States, particularly Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, also I prefer to refer to her as occasionally coherent, but occasional cortex also seems to be the more popular nickname.
Yeah,
In any case,
her cortex does work occasionally. Very.
okay, so in any case, she is now pointing out why we need socialized medicine, obviously because of the coronavirus, despite the fact that a lot of countries with socialized medicine are handling it much worse. I mean, Italy is pretty far down that road, and they are getting absolutely hammered. China is literally a communist country where the government controls everything, and let's see how great of a job they did. I think what a lot of people are missing is that local governments, individuals, and communities are in a much better position to respond because you need to have a rapid response. If you have this massive bloated bureaucracy, you're not going to be able to respond to every individual case because different communities will have different requirements for containment. So I remember reading a story a little while back about how at O'Hare International Airport, one of the handful of airports where people could actually come back into the United States, there was a 6-hour line for testing, and each test only took 30 seconds. And people were complaining at President Trump and trying to weaponize it, saying, why don't you hire more workers and get this problem solved? And all I could sit there thinking was, and the city is involved in their own airport. If you're so concerned about it as a city official, why don't you splurge a little bit and actually get a handful of temp workers in your region? Why does the federal government have to hold your hand for every step of this process?
Yeah, I was gonna say. I mean, what are you paid to do? I mean, tax dollars pay your salary. What is it what is your job?
I mean, you're paid to go on Twitter and agitate for victim status and try and undermine American liberties. That's what you're paid for. This is
Yeah.
Chicago, remember?
Yeah, Chicago is a sad city.
Mm.
There's a reason they call it Chirac.
The Windy City.
Yeah.
It's the Windy City because this government blows.
Well, it was actually originally called the Windy City because basically the idea was that everyone there was a windbag. But yeah, it definitely is a very, very sad place to live. I'm glad I don't live there. In any case, I think we need also to dig a little deeper into what do you think is going to happen with this House bill that includes, I believe it's supposed to be some permanent family leave, like 7 days or something like that, and then 10 days specifically for the coronavirus. Do you think there's any hope of stopping it?
Well, President Trump seems to be on board, and he's in a politically tough position because he doesn't want to be seen as not doing anything, despite the fact that sometimes, I mean, very often, government doing nothing is exactly what we need because it's not the proper avenue for solving this problem. And these actions, many of which in the bill, like just creating new entitlement programs, expanding food stamps, like permanently, expanding family leave permanently, this has nothing to do with solving the coronavirus. They're using this crisis in order to push forward a political agenda that more reasonable people would not agree to when they weren't terrified.
Absolutely.
So, yeah, I mean, I think that I'm very bearish on actually stopping it. Only 40 members of the House Republicans actually even bothered to try. The Senate is less than wonderful when it comes to these sorts of things. I mean, we have a slim majority in the Senate. I would say it's slimmer because Mittens doesn't count. And you have Collins and Murkowski as well. I think that there are plenty of people who might, for lack of a better term, cuck out on this bill and just agree to spend the money, not realizing that they're digging us deeper into a hole that we won't be able to get out of. At this point, what do we even elect these people for?
Yeah, I do kind of wonder. Like they do seem to be paid not to do anything.
No, I wish it would be better if they were paid not to do anything. I love a government that does nothing, and I think the founding fathers did much in their power to try and set it up that way with all these checks and balances and all these internal barriers to getting anything done ever. But now it's getting more and more efficient at actually getting stuff done. And whenever you can get a bipartisan consensus on things that need to be done, you're going to be in store for some major garbage.
Yeah, I was gonna say I would rather like anything that's bipartisan. I kind of want to vote against.
Yeah, that's fair enough. I mean, you and I are both pretty staunch partisans ourselves, but anytime the Republicans agree with the Democrats, like anytime both parties can come together, it's usually something that sucks. I mean,
Abs.
I point to the Iraq War, I point to the welfare state, and now I point to this steaming pile of a bill that's making its way through the House in the pandemonium of the Coronapocalypse.
Coronapocalypse. There we go.
Yeah, with Lyme disease, because you can't have Corona without Lyme.
Come on with it. Yeah, you can't have Corona without a line.
Oh, boy. Speaking of Limeys, the British are apparently having a little bit of a hard time as well. I think they're deploying military forces to certain shops. I'm going to try and get more data on that at present, but I just had to go for the pun.
My understanding is they at least partly just told old people and other compromised people to stay home themselves and told everyone else just to keep living life.
I think that's what they said initially, although I believe they are accelerating their response now. It's getting more intense. Also, coronavirus has apparently forced the United Kingdom and the EU to delay Brexit trade talks because they're more concerned about just keeping everyone alive. So that's going to slow down the Brexit process even further, which has already dragged out for more than 3 years now.
It's kind of funny.
Well, not more than 3 years, but yeah, about 3 years.
I mean, honestly, I hope that it ends up being no deal. I think that's for the UK the long-term best solution, but I think it's also a good opportunity for the US and the UK to work together.
Yeah, I would love a bilateral trade agreement with the United Kingdom, preferably one where I forget the name of it, although I should remember because it's important. The idea that we just accept whatever regulations the other country has so that you only have to pass one. Like if you're an American company and you've passed American regulatory standards, you're allowed to sell in Britain and vice versa. I mean, I as opposed to having some sort of central authority negotiate that, where it's like both parties are going to have to be bound by the same regulations, like the European Union. I mean, I love the idea of the European Union as a trade bloc, but I don't like it as a regulatory body, and that's really where it's gone wrong. So I think that if we move more in the direction of unrestricted and decentralized trading regimens, that'd be great. And I think the United Kingdom and the United States are in a perfect position by being so economically and culturally similar to move more towards that style of trade agreement.
That seems reasonable. Yeah, I mean, honestly, I don't know why we still insist on having all this regulatory garbage.
Because powerful people benefit from having it. I mean, the well-connected can practice regulatory capture and get their potential competitors at a bottleneck disadvantage by raising the cost of entry into the field. It's just there's a lot of garbage and there's a lot of rot, and it's largely because of dispersed costs and concentrated benefits. If you can screw everybody else in the country over out of about 10 or 15 bucks, and you can make hundreds of millions or billions of dollars off of it, you're going to fight very hard to keep that money, but not a lot of people are going to fight back. And you do that hundreds and hundreds of times, and we end up where we are now. So, I mean,
Yeah,
this is an enduring problem, and a lot of people are smelling blood with this coronavirus, so I imagine it could get worse.
yeah, coronavirus, the bane of our existence.
I mean, I'd say Democrats are the bane of my existence. Maybe statists more generally, but coronavirus is, for me, at the very least, a minor inconvenience. There are some people I love who are immunocompromised and older, and I'm very concerned for them. I'm probably not going to be able to visit them for a while, aside from Skype calls or phone or all those other various technological insights that and innovations that have redeemed Silicon Valley to a certain extent, although its politics is rapidly trying to undermine that.
Well, yeah, its politics are basically trying to make it such that in the future, in the very near future, there may not be so many nice things coming out of it. Yeah, I mean, honestly, they're chasing innovation out of Silicon Valley.
Right, and that's a pretty annoying problem. So I'm also trying to see if I can find anything else on this. Okay, supposedly this is just a headline. It looks like New York bar and restaurant owners could potentially be jailed if they break lockdown. So that's not great.
Yeah, I mean, this really seems very totalitarian.
Yeah, I mean, as I've pointed out in the past, authoritarian ideas and support for them tend to go up in the presence of infectious disease because one of the urges of human beings, just more generally, and we've seen this play out countless times, is when they're under an imminent threat, they tend to want to turn to some sort of central authority to protect them, regardless of whether or not that's actually effective. And the government is always happy to oblige.
Oh, the government would love to have anything that means more power.
Right. So that's going to be rather aggravating, but it looks like that's the way it's headed. I wonder how many of these powers will be surrendered once the virus is finally run its course, which might not be for as long as 18 months if we're going to wait until a vaccine is developed.
I would guess none.
Yeah.
They're not going to surrender anything.
Which is why we have to keep, our freedom of speech and our guns and any of the Bill of Rights that is still in force. I mean, it's being chipped away at day by day. I think, and I've said this before, but I'll say it again, I think the Fourth Amendment is almost dead with the way it's taken seriously now. I mean, if you have metadata being collected by the government, you have personal
The Fourth
information.
Amendment, yeah, the Fourth Amendment, unfortunately, has essentially been repealed.
I mean, there are still a handful of cases where it applies, but a handful.
Last thing I wanted to talk about. So we've really been disappointed in the Republican Party's response to these, attempts to take away our liberty, attempts to intervene with the economy and make this indeed more of a welfare state than it already is. What do you think about, a lot of these people who we're supposed to be looking up to in the party? What do you think about our party's leaders, and who do you think should be the leaders? Who do you think are the ideological leaders, I guess, is another question.
All right, well, I'm going to try and pull up the list of the people who voted against this most recent piece of garbage because I want to make sure that I don't accidentally include anyone who doesn't deserve it. So I've always been a fan of the Freedom Caucus. I very deeply believe in the idea of limited government and individual autonomy, individual rights, individual responsibility, which is also why I'm a little bit irritated about this idea of a bailout for particularly the airline industries, which are suffering very heavily, but also have spent a lot of their liquidity trying to buy back their own shares, and now they're short on cash. I mean, I think that okay, I'm going to go on a little bit on tangent, but I'm going to go back to answer your question. I think that private property and private profit also come with private risk and private loss. And if you're losing money based on your own ventures, you don't have a right to turn to the government and start sucking on the teat and taking money away from other individuals. So I'm very irritated that a lot of people who are supposedly capitalists are also coming out in favor of a bailout. We don't do bailouts. There's no such thing as too big to fail. If you actually screwed up badly enough not to be able to handle unprecedented turns in the market, which is kind of your job as the head of a major corporation, then, I mean, either restructure your business or potentially go out. I mean, it's not a question of who's at fault necessarily. It's a question of who can manage capital and assets best in the given market situation. But for people who don't see that, I mean, many of the people in the Republican primary party at present, they need to be primaried. And I will certainly be looking into primarying my representative. I mean, I'm not eligible to run myself, otherwise I might.
Who's your congressman?
I believe John Rutherford.
Oh, that guy definitely deserves to be primaried.
So, I just gave away a lot of information about my address, but whatever.
I don't know. His district's pretty big, I believe.
I mean, everybody, yeah, I think 700,000 or so. So, but I've narrowed myself down a little bit. If you want to try and find DJ Trump, wonderful hackers, now is your opportunity to do so.
DJ Trump.
Yeah, please don't.
Yeah,
I don't know, and I've also used my name on occasion. So, let's see.
I promise you, his district's pretty big. It's almost 2,000 square miles, so that's a reasonably sized district.
Okay, so I'm going through the list of Republicans who voted no on this most recent bill. Just a heroes list, almost, the Hall of Fame. Bradley Byrne, Andy Biggs, Debbie Lesko, Tom McClintock, Ken Buck, Michael Waltz, Greg Stewart, I might be mispronouncing that, Jody B. Heiss, Barry Loudermilk. Loudermilk?
Yeah.
Steve King from Iowa, who I would not usually place in the ideological leader camp by any means, but I guess good vote for this. Russ Fulcher, Jim Banks, Tom Emmer, Billy Long, Jason Smith, Dan Bishop, Ted Budd, Jim Jordan. Okay, I love that guy. I love that guy a lot. Warren Davidson, Kevin Hearn, Joe Wilson, Jeff Duncan, William R. Timmons, Ralph Norman, Tim Burchett, Scott Desjarlis, John W. Rose, Mark E. Green, Louis Gohmert, Lance, it's Gohmert or Gohmert? I don't want to mispronounce it. Gohmert. Lance Gooden, Randy Weber, Chip Roy, Michael Cloud, Brian Babin, Ben Klein, Ryan Steele, Jim Sensenbrenner, Glenn Groffman, Mike Gallagher, and Alex X. Mooney. Those are all the little good boys and girls on the list at present, and Santa's going to give them the present of not trying to primary them.
Yeah.
Everyone
So,
else is getting Cole, which is primary
well,
Trump. Except for there are a handful of people who couldn't vote at all. I guess technically Mark Meadows is still on the list for some reason, despite the fact that he stepped up to chief of staff and is no longer eligible. So
I think Tom Massey was probably quarantined because that's what I think happened with him.
yeah, he's not. He wasn't voting. He's excused, I suppose. Paul Gosar didn't vote. Matt Gaetz didn't vote. Matt Gaetz is quarantined. John Young didn't vote. I mean, I'm not going to say necessarily these people are great or not. We've named a couple of
Well, most
people
of them aren't. Don Young isn't, but the others are pretty good.
right. But I'm going to say the 17 should at least get benefit of the doubt in some cases. But if you were on the list and you voted yes, I am looking at you with a lot of concern. And as in the Senate, I'm a big fan of Rand Paul. I think he's great. Ted Cruz is another ideological leader. Mike Lee has his ups and downs. I mean, he's been very good on a lot of constitutional issues, but
And very bad on a lot of welfare things.
yes. So
Family leave, so I don't know how he'd vote. Yeah, Rand Paul's probably the one I trust the most on this one.
right. I think Mittens is almost kind of an anti-leader. He embodies everything I don't want the Republican Party to be. So I would say look at Mittens and don't be bad enough that I give you an obnoxious nickname because I'll do it.
Well, on that note, I think it's about time to wrap up. So thanks, DJ Trump, and tune in to us tomorrow at 7 a.m. Pacific from 7 to 9.
All right. Thanks
Okay.
for having me, George.
Yep. Good.